Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. This week, I am joined by Simon Rinne of Mindful Men, who happens to be just down the road from where I am on the beautiful Sunshine Coast. It's I've done an episode of Simon's podcast. Turns out our kids actually have gone to the same daycare, and we're always meaning to catch up, but we never seem to get there. So this one's been a long time coming. I'm stoked to have you on. So Simon, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Matt, thanks for having me on. And we always seem to catch up digitally
Yeah.
over Zoom or Riverside, but rarely in person. So maybe after this, we'll go grab a coffee somewhere.
That sounds pretty good. Simon, do you want to, for those that are listening that don't know you, do you want to give everybody a bit of background, let everyone know what the Simon Rinne story is?
Oh, it's a big story. So, yeah, I'm a dad of two. I've got a 7-year-old boy, Gussie, and a 4-year-old daughter, Pippa, who's going on 16 as we speak. um, and, yeah, we live on the sunny coast. We've been up here since 2015. I can't do the maths. But, yeah, in my spare time outside of being a dad, I also run my own business. So, Mindful Men is a therapy business, and it's dedicated to supporting men with their mental health and disability challenges. And yeah, I absolutely love being in this private practice space. It's not something I've been doing for a long time. Been doing it for 2 years. Before that, I was a public servant for 15 odd years. But yeah, really love being in small business and most particularly helping guys overcome their own personal challenges. And that comes from a lived experience of mental illness myself. So I'm someone who I think for 35, 36 years have lived with my own mental health challenges. And so I come at my therapy from a lived experience lens, and in addition to a social work lens as well. So, yeah, something I'm really passionate about and love doing. And let's unpack that all.
That's I mean, mental health's obviously just such a massive topic at the moment, especially for men. And one of the things I did want to ask you, because give everyone a bit of background, we kind of first met when you were started going through that transition from to starting your own business. And I know from kind of being on the outside looking in, how much of a tough step that was for you. And now being kind of 2 years removed from it, I just wanted to kind of open up by letting you talk about like what are the benefits that you've seen now kind of going through that initial stage to where you are now, because there's a lot of people that I think are scared to take the jump to kind of do something that maybe fulfills them a little bit more. And you're somebody who's lived through that. I'm somebody who's been lucky enough to live through that and work through that as well. So tell everybody a little bit about now 2 years into it. What's that experience been like? What are the positive benefits, and what are some of the hesitations you had initially that have subsided now that you're at the point that you are?
It's an interesting time we're having this discussion because I think all the stuff that I went through 2 years ago has come back again. So, and what I mean by that is 2 years ago, I stepped away from this cushy job in the public service that I'd been in for a long time. So I knew my salary. I had great superannuation. I had lots of leave available to me, but I always wanted to run my own business. And same with my wife. We wanted to have a family business. And so stepping away from that old career was hugely daunting. It was scary. Like, where do I find my clients, for example? I think we were talking about that like 2 years ago. And how do I replace the income? Because that income pays the mortgage, it pays for the kids to go to school and food and utilities and all that type of stuff. And so that was a huge thing for me. And at the time, I didn't really understand why it was such a huge thing. Things have been happening more recently where I've identified that I have financial trauma. And that comes from being a kid. So when I was a kid, probably, I don't know, 10 roughly, mum and dad had their own small business that was going pear-shaped, basically. And there was always arguments in the house about finances. And I never really connected the dots as to why I get so triggered around money and losing that old income and the insecurity that comes with small business. And ever since, starting my own business, what happens when a bill comes in and I've got to pay this bill? I get triggered, and I start getting really stressed and anxious, and so forth. I'm always thinking in the future. Where are we in 6 months? Where are we in 12 months? What happens if things go belly up and I've got to pay all these bills? How am I going to do that? And I say it's come up recently for me, this financial trauma, because I'm now going from sole trader and we've created a company. So I'm moving beyond that initial just me in business to actually this is actually going really well. I've replaced the income. I'm now hitting that threshold for GST, lodgements and all that type of stuff. And now I want to bring people in to help me out. So I want to bring my wife Rachel in to help me as a business manager, for example. And then I want to hire a new practitioner to help me out and take some more caseload from me. And we're going to expand into new areas. So from a business perspective, things are going really well. But at the same time, I've got this huge, oh no, the finances. What's going to happen with the finances again? It's come back in a wave, and I'm freaking out about it. So Rachel, my wife, she left her corporate job, just like I did 2 years ago. She's finally done it herself, and she's come on, and I'm like, okay, I'm now the sole breadwinner. I've got to try and create enough work so that I can pay for her too, because she's not going to be income. She's not going to be income making in the business, her particular role. So then I'm okay. I've got to hire another practitioner to help carry that load as well, but I don't know how to do that. I've never done that. And so there's also a financial element to that. It's got to pay them, for their
Mm.
time. And then it's also the finances around setting up a company and having an accountant do that, and going to lawyers. And so all these things are happening. And recently I've broken down. So, I've had a little bit of a meltdown recently. In fact, this week it happened. And I went to my therapist and we're talking about it. And she's like, this comes to this financial trauma that I know so many people are experiencing over the last few years. Like, the cost of living's going up, money's a big issue in a lot of households, and I'm feeling that at the moment. And so it's been an interesting time 2 years in, but at the same time, like last night, I was looking at my numbers for last financial year. So we've just clicked over a financial year, and I was looking at my targets. I almost hit my target, and I've never made this much money before. And it's not about how much money I make. It's, I think, more reflecting on, I did it. I
Mm.
replaced the old income. I'm doing well. I've got a business that is growing and is in some elements it's thriving. It's just that I'm fixated on the negative aspects of it. And so, me as a therapist, I'm now going to put my therapist hat on. I'd often tell myself the same as I would tell my clients: is how do we flip that negative discourse internally to look at the positives? And so the positives have been that I've done it, and I know how to generate income now. I know how to go out and get client referrals. I know how to support practitioners because I've been doing it now for 2 years. I know what my business needs from a practitioner. And that's all exciting. And so I've got to start flipping that discourse internally. Go, yes, things cost money, business costs money, but I try to have that mantra of, like, sometimes to make money, you've got to spend money as well. And so I'm trying to shift that internal discourse, and that's something that's come with just trial and error through the business of trying things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, learning from that, getting different supports. Like, you supported me right in those early days, and my therapist at the moment, my supervisor, other business coaches along the way, my wife as well, but also coming back to self and going, I'm doing a good job. No matter how badly I see it as being, I'm also doing the best I can. So I hope that answered the question. It probably went on a bit of a tangent, but that's life in a mental health brain as mine.
No, but that's all really important points, especially like that financial trauma that you mentioned, right? Because you know, I think we all experience it to some degree, right? And everybody's obviously got a very unique experience, but I know, even from my point of view, one of the things that I was told by, and I'm very cognizant of it now, having kind of identified a similar pattern to what you identified, where it's like, there's almost this scarcity mindset around there's not
Mm,
enough to go around. You keep whatever you get, you keep, like, because you don't know when the next little bit's coming. And when you take that step into business, especially when you're going into the territory that you're going into, where it's just not about you anymore. You've also got other people relying on you, and that's like a massive step. That's almost like starting, as you're experiencing, and as you mentioned, the business all over again, because you're not just having to support you and pay you out of it. You've now got your wife to worry about, and like her income, and making sure that she's taken care of, which was an element in the past, but more so now. But then once you bring on other staff who aren't attached to you through family, that creates a whole other element, because not only, and this can be one of the most rewarding things about business, but it can also be one of the most stressful. Now that person's family like their well-being is directly correlated to how well you do at business. So it's all very it's interesting stuff. And you saying it, it reminds me of some of the times that we've been through and working through that. And I kind of look back in retrospect thinking, if I had the tools that I've got now to deal with that back then as I was going through it, what would have it looked like? You're lucky enough you've got a great support network there that's helped you through. So, the financial trauma piece is really a pertinent thing, because, as you know, today's day and age is just everyone's under massive amounts of financial pressure.
Absolutely, and it plays out because a lot of the work that I get is, say, through government programs. So I do a lot of work in disability, and so there's a lot of negative talk about how do they rein in the costs of this disabilities insurance scheme that we've got here in Australia. And I see a lot of stuff on social media from other practitioners, people in small businesses as well, going, "Oh no, oh, no, I'm not getting referrals. I'm not getting referrals." And for me, I'm just like, how do I remove myself from that and kind of trust that things will be okay? And a lot of it is just trusting that things will be okay, and just nurturing the referral networks that I've got, and nurturing the relationships that I've got with my clients and other people around the sunny coast, particularly. And it's interesting. I had this discussion with a counsellor in Adelaide, whose name's also Simon, and we both say that every time we get stressed about the finances in our business, about no clients or not enough referrals coming through, someone pops up. And that happened to me this morning. Someone rang me, and I'm like, oh, I could breathe again. Like, someone out there knows that I'm here and is looking for this service. And so a lot of it is just trust that things will play out in the end. And I think one of the interesting things that I did with my numbers last night when I was looking at my financial report was, I was so fixated on the week to week earnings and the month to month earnings. But when I looked at it from a bigger picture, like the whole year, and I could look at it as an average, I was actually doing a lot better than I thought. I thought I was crashing this year. I thought, like, the referrals are dried up. I'm going backwards. What's going on? Because last year was like, the end of last year was just crazy good. But then when I played the averages, I'm like, actually, things haven't been as bad as I've been playing them out to be. Again, I've
Mm.
been stuck in that negative discourse, when I should just look at things more holistically and more broader, come out of the weeds and look at it from, top down, and see everything that's playing out. And things are playing out just like they should be.
And having the ability to take yourself out of that, that's such an important thing, because we get so caught up in it, and in the work, and in what we need to do, and in what isn't going right. We need to be able to objectively take that step back and go, hey, hang on, things aren't going too bad. I got to give myself a little bit of credit here, because it's almost like when you have one thing or a few things go wrong in a row, or a few things that are causing you stress, you'll tend to fall into whatever your default worry is. And for yourself, it's the monetary side of things. For other people, it is like it generally comes back to that money thing. There's not enough. Like, it's that scarcity mindset of, like, I've got to have more, and I can't be putting I can't be putting as much out, and it's a hard thing to overcome.
Absolutely. And I guess this also coincides with me moving house. And we're talking off air about me renovating a house. So we've had a lot of finances associated with that, like paying tradespeople and not knowing what the electrician's about to charge us. That's a bit stressor in itself. And Rachel's got some medical stuff going on as well. We're not sure how that's going to impact us as well. And so I've been juggling all these balls and thinking about all these things too much. Like I haven't given myself a break, and so I guess it's important for us to with the supports that we've got. I haven't done this all by myself. In fact, I draw a lot on my supports to help me zoom out. When we do, it's really nice, but often we get stuck in those weeds. So for anyone listening who's stuck in the weeds, take a breath, some self compassion, know that you're doing okay, and maybe do what I do, reach out to as many supports as you can just to get their perspective, because often the perspective that's not within your own nuclear family, for example, or your small business, can give you the peace of mind that you're looking for.
And that's, just a common topic. Doesn't matter whether it's business or it's just life. Like, even if you're, and look, like, having been in business for as long as, like, not that I've been in business by myself for the last 15 years. So, like, I'm well aware of what goes, it has to go into it mentally, but business isn't for everybody, right? Like, some people can be perfectly happy going to doing their 9 to 5, taking a paycheck, earning good money, and then just like going home and being able to, whereas others want business. But back to what you said, where it's like rely on those support networks, comes back to, I guess, a message that I know you put across a lot, and a message that, I really push as well. And it's that asking for help thing. And it's something that, as men, like, to speak bluntly, most of us are pretty shitty at doing. We're too proud to ask for help. We're too proud to, or we think that we should be able to just get through it. And, you've spoken about an instance of it in business, and a lot of people obviously come and see you because that's what they're at that point, that they need some help themselves. Do you want to talk about what kind of, where are people, what do you see a lot of people coming to you with? Like, what are the problems that you're seeing a lot of men come up against, specifically fathers, but what are some of the things that you're encountering with the people that you're working with?
Yeah, I think, well, finances for one. People struggling to make ends meet. Mental health. So yeah, it's around a lot of depression at the moment, isolation, and particularly for guys, it's this immense sense of loneliness. I think COVID highlighted that we as a species thrive on connection, and so when we're not connected, we can really it can really impact our mental health. And so guys are coming in and they're lonely and depressed, and that's a big one. Um, Others, for dads particularly, there's seeing relationship issues between spouses, but also children as well. How to contain things like anger. So anger management is coming up a lot. Addiction, drugs, alcohol specifically, and just a myriad of all of that. You know, and it's often just not one thing; it's multiple things. How do we address multiple issues in our lives? And I share a lot about me on things like this podcast and my podcast, etc., because I want to show guys that we can normalize these discussions by talking about them. We don't have to bottle them up. We can ask someone for help, and it's okay. And it's okay that your therapist might be someone who gets help as well. So I'm a therapist in therapy. I think I mentioned it a few times already today, and that's okay. Like, we're all human. We don't have to do life alone. We don't have to be the experts. We can rely and lean on other people, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And so when guys come into therapy with me, I do a little bit differently. Like, I take a lot of it out of the clinic. It's very casualized. I don't say big words. Like, it's just more of a chat. Like, it feels like a chat, right? And one of the first questions I'll ask any guy that comes through my clinic is, have you ever done anything like this before? And I'm interested in that because many of the guys haven't. So they're not sure what to expect. Many of them have been told, oh, you need to go see Simon, but they don't know why, or they've been coerced into do it, or they've been mandated by the law to do it. And so we explore it just gently like that. Like, what's their expectations? What's my expectations as a therapist as well? And I bring that expectation down to meet them where they're at. And so they're some of the things that they do, and they come in and they're curious as to what this therapy thing is and what it looks like. So I might map out what potentially therapy is for them, and then we go on a journey together. We explore whatever issue it is, and often through that exploration we find multiple issues. So it's about identifying which one's the most worrisome for them, or which one do we need to focus on the most. I'll dabble a sprinkle of self in there as well. So guys ask me, like, Simon, do you know what it's like to be depressed? I'm like, yeah, I do. Actually, I've been depressed. Or Simon, do you know what it's like to struggle with addiction? And I'll say, yeah, like I'm almost 12 months, sober from drinking. I used alcohol to numb all the stresses and the worries that I had, and in particular, my obsessive compulsive disorder. So my brain is an OCD brain, and it just doesn't stop. It doesn't shut off. And so I'm always thinking, and I think this is where this financial trauma stuff comes in, because I'm always thinking, always worrying, always catastrophizing in my brain. And so I just give a little sprinkle of this lived experience so that they can go, oh, maybe it's okay to open up to Simon. He kind of knows what I'm talking about or what I'm about to express. And it is a magical thing when we can get guys in there and start opening up and talking and exploring as well. And it's not guys crying on a couch necessarily. Like that very rarely happens. In fact, it's just guys having a good chat, whether it's in the clinic, whether it's telehealth, similar to what we're doing right now, or whether it's a walk on the beach or go grab a coffee or something like that. It is different to what guys actually think therapy looks like.
Because that's probably a really common misconception and something that turns a lot of men off, right? Thinking it's this sterile environment where I'm going to lie down on the couch and I'm going to have somebody there with a notepad, psychoanalyzing every single and judging me.
Mm.
That's I think one thing that a lot of men, like, they can put up this facade, but they don't want to be judged. Like, they feel like they're trying their best and they're doing their best, but they don't want to go to a judgmental place where, so to get them out and get them, moving and just doing something where it's just a chat, like, that's really good information, especially if there's people listening to this that have been on the fence about, you know, should I go see a counselor? Should I go see a therapist? Like, just know that there's avenues out there where it's not maybe what you think it is.
Absolutely, and that's what stops them from coming, because of that unknown of what it would look like. And that's what stopped me going to speaking up about it, was the unknown of what people would say when I first mentioned the words mental health about 2012. I was scared. I didn't know what the other people would say. There's a huge stigma associated with talking about mental health, and particularly men talking about mental health, because we're meant to be strong and tough and not feel our emotions. It's okay for us to feel anger, for example, as a man. As a culture, we accept that, but not so much sadness or loneliness, depression, all these types of things, anxiety. These aren't things that we associate with what it means to be a man. And so, us talking about this to start with helps to break down some of those barriers. And then for any guy that comes in, I do have a notepad, but I draw pictures. They always say me, I say, can I draw a picture about this? And we draw a picture and we conceptualize it with a tool or a strategy or a thought bubble and go, okay, let's explore this. It's not about, as you said, not about judgment. In fact, I've had some recent clients come in who live with OCD. And one of them particularly has lived with it for longer than I have. And he said, Simon, you're the first person I've ever met who has OCD. And so we have some wonderful and some really interesting conversations around what the brain is doing through our OCD, and we share those experiences. And I said to him yesterday, actually, he was with me yesterday, and I said, what's the benefit of you coming? Because you seem pretty good, right? And he said, it's connection, Simon. It's connection with someone who is like-minded. That's why he comes. And so we don't do a lot of therapy. We do a lot of connection. And that's what that's what I'm there for. It's just to help guys connect.
Yeah, and connection's such an important part, right? Whether it's, you know, going and doing an activity with other men, or it's I was doing an episode of the podcast yesterday, and I was talking very similar topic that I was talking about yesterday, and I mentioned, like, jiu-jitsu, right? Anyone who's listened to the podcast knows that I'm a pretty big advocate for it, and I actually said during that one of the major unseen benefits, I think, of jiu-jitsu for a lot of men, especially men that are, in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, because you do see a lot of older men start to get into it, is that time at the end of the session where you're just sitting around and talking. And sometimes, some days you're going to have these deep conversations about the meaning of life and where your place in the universe, and other days it's just going to be general shit talking. But that connection piece is, there's a whole bunch of other physical benefits and things like that that go with it, but that connection piece is just something that's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And guys coming into the clinic or they meet me wherever we do therapy can be the only time they left the house that day, or the only other guy. Like I've got guys who have never worked with other guys before. They've got their own trauma, maybe at the hands of another male, and so them coming to see me is starting to break that down. And as you said, like some days we go deep, other days we go very superficial, and it's just a coffee and chat, or just hanging out, or going to the beach and just looking out and doing some breathing exercises. And nobody knows that you're in therapy. It's just like two guys hanging out, really. And that's the beauty of it. Is it doesn't have to look like what we imagine it looks like. We can get creative with it. We can tailor it to our needs, and just see where it goes.
Do you see, I guess, the time you mentioned, back in 2012, and 2012 seems like an absolute lifetime ago, right? Uh,
Yes,
you
it
know,
does.
for especially married, kids, business, like everything's happened since then. But you're 100% right in the fact that back then, talking about mental health, it just wasn't a thing. Let alone go back to, when I finished school back in, 2000, that it was completely frowned upon, right? Do you see the tide starting to turn a little bit with all the information that's out there at the moment?
Yeah, very slowly. And this is a great example of how of that tide turning. Of we actually have sitting down and having a chat about men's mental health. So to paint the picture for everyone about my story more broadly. So I grew up in Adelaide, the northern suburbs of Adelaide, which is working class Adelaide. They used to build Holden's cars there. Right, it's my parents were. Mum was a cleaner. Dad worked at the council. He wasn't a lollipop man. He was behind a desk. But yeah, it's just council work. Like we weren't raking in like money, and they had a cleaning business, so that was a small business. There was a cleaning business. So and thinking about high school and school, like most kids didn't finish school. Hardly any went to university. I was one of the few that went to university. A lot of actually would drop out year 10, 11. A lot of single mums, a lot of unemployment, lower socioeconomic, drugs, gangs, all that type of stuff. It wasn't a very safe place to grow up. Although nothing really happened, a lot of the stuff that I thought was going to happen was just all in my mind. And so this is the place that I grew up in the 80s, 90s, noughties. I played footy, so Aussie rules footy. I did athletics, basketball, a very alpha male household. So I got three brothers. We all did the same. You could call us a jock household for any of the US market who are listening to this. And the things we watched on TV, like Rambo, Die Hard, Terminator, very hyper masculine. And so, in all these environments, school, footy fields, sports fields, what we watched on TV, it was this personification of a male is someone who's like a hero, who's strong, tough. And there was never a discussion about guys talking about their emotions. And so it was very much of a hush hush thing. I remember if I did shed a tear, maybe at home, dad might say, stop being a sook, or if you're in the schoolyard and you might show some sort of emotion, someone might label you as a girl or sissy or gay. I was called gay so many times just because maybe I was a little bit emotional. And so when you get all these things and it happens and it's at a society level, but also the nuclear level at home as well, you embody that. I didn't know how to talk about mental health. Mental health wasn't something that we was even in the dictionary, I don't think. It wasn't in the vocabulary. And it wasn't until 2012, after 2 years of Rachel, my now wife, begging me to go and see someone about my drinking and about being snappy. That's the symptoms that I was showing. It took 2 years for me to go, you know what? She's finally right. Maybe I've got to go speak to someone. And that's when it opened up the doors for diagnoses. Oh, Simon, you've been living with depression for the better part of 20 years. Anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder. I didn't even know what OCD was. I kind of knew what depression was, we started talking about depression at that stage. You had, I remember on the TV, like Beyond Blue and the Black Dog, that type of stuff was starting to be on the TV. Anxiety to a lesser degree, but OCD, no, never heard of that. And so it took a long time for me to even walk into that, to bury my own pride and go, you know what, I think, what Rachel's saying is right. I do need to speak to someone. But even then, I felt like nothing really changed. I'd got the labels, um, but still nobody was talking about it. I'd only talk about it to the therapist that I went to. In fact, I went to the therapist expecting them to fix me, and for me not to do any homework on myself, to just go there and they'd wave a magic wand or give me a magic pill, and that would be the end of mental illness for me. But it wasn't the case, and so it probably took another 10 years after that for me to start working on myself and going, you know what, I've actually got to do the work that I'm talking about in these therapy sessions. And it was probably around that time when mental health started to be a bit more mainstream. Um, and I think particularly after, say, something like September 11 happened, I remember seeing a bit more stuff around mental health on TVs, but very little. Then COVID went boom. And it's like, we need to have mental health discussions. You had workplaces really worried about people's well-being. The government was really worried about people's well-being. You'd have Zoom parties and Zoom catch-ups, Zoom coffees, everything Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever it was. And it was during that period that I burnt out. I had a period where I was juggling too many balls. We had two under three, so Pippa was born in the COVID year. At the end, or just before COVID started, Pippa was born. We were, everyone was locked down. I had this mysterious back pain. I was trying to go. I finished up at the gym, and then the gym closed, and I thought I tweaked something in my back, but we couldn't know. No specialist could diagnose what that was. In fact, the doctor said, Simon, we could do surgery, but we don't know what we're looking for. And so I had this mysterious back pain that I couldn't, I wasn't comfortable standing, sitting, laying down. I was always in pain. My mental health was going rampant. I was drinking way too much and I burnt out. And it was through that, and I guess workplaces being susceptible to mental health discussions, that I took off my mask. And for the first time ever, outside of my therapist and Rachel, I started sharing the story. And this is where Mindful Men was born, really. And I started sharing it at work, and I started being okay with not being okay, like actually wearing it as like a cape, saying, you know what, I've got a mental health story here and I want to share this story. I'm sick of hiding it. And I think from there, I started tuning into other people doing similar and finding other guys doing similar. But it's still very much only a select few. There's like, we're throwing rocks around and pebbles into the pond, and there's little ripples. But we still got a long way to go, particularly for men's mental health, because a lot of the focus is on perpetrators of family and domestic violence. Every time there's something that happens in the media, there's a big spotlight on the guy. Or we've got a male issue here, we've got a men's issue here. So that's something I want to be able to change and help guys get get support before they get to that point. We talked about anger before. That's just part of the anger cycle. It's getting to a point where they just blow up like a volcano because they don't know how to talk about it. And so COVID really helped it, but we still got a long way to go.
But that COVID piece, and I'll be quick to get off this topic because it's something that I can get pretty I can get passionate about and definitely go on a tangent. But it brings it back to, I guess, that initial point, something you've said about isolation, right? Like it's that loneliness. It's not having access to a support network. It's not, and then on top of it, to feed into another topic, like you've got the financial stress there. People's jobs are closing down. Like, for us personally, we ran a business through that time which just got shut down overnight. Like I've spoken about on here and with many people, like the financial stress during that time when you have this business that you've spent 8 years building to a point where like it's almost at the goal that you set out where you started, and overnight you have 60% of your revenue just drop out the bottom end for something you can't control. Like it's all the whole mental health thing it's all interconnected, right? Like, and that's, I think, one thing that I've struggled with in the past is thinking that a lot of the stuff I'm experiencing happens in isolation. So you've got the financial stress over here, and then you've got the anger over here, and then you've got, you know, I'm going to ask you a question about like the like alcohol and everything like that, and then you've got the drinking over here. But I think one thing that's really important to understand is it's all interconnected. Like there's always
Mm.
there's going to be a thread that's going to share all those issues together, and I think it's important for men to kind of go right, like there's nothing wrong with me. Like I'm not a bad person. This is something that everybody goes through, but there's something here which is having a knock on effect into other areas of my life. And I probably need to go and get some help for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that self compassion is beautiful here, is where we can go, you know what, we're doing the best that we can. And I think a lot of the analogies that we use in the men's mental health space is look at ourselves as cars, right? You wouldn't hesitate to keep your car on the road. You take it to the mechanic, you get it serviced every 6 to 12 months or whatever it is. You put some new tires on it, put some new oil, and all this type of stuff. Self care for the car. Why don't we do that to ourselves? To keep us going, we need to keep our body in check. And often guys think of it just as a body thing, a physical thing. If I've got muscles or if I'm flexible, then I'm all good. But it's also the mind as well, because the mind gets cluttered. Just like a filing cabinet. There's so many tabs you can have open before it just becomes a big blur. So if we can look at ourselves as a car and go, you know what, I need a bit of a tune up every now and then, and that's what therapy could be. Or it doesn't have to be therapy. It could be a good gym program, like something that you could do, a bit of fitness stuff. It's connecting. It's going to see your GP and getting health checks, when you need to. As we get older, we need to do more different health checks as well. It's about tuning in with our food. What food are we putting in? That could be the oil of the car. Like, what food are we putting in? Are we getting enough sleep? All the basic stuff. Is if we can look at ourselves like that, I think we can start to move the needle in a way where we can get guys to go, you know what, it's okay to go and speak to someone. Like, that's fine. I'm just fine tuning myself.
And you talk about food and what you're putting in your body and how that, and we could both talk about how that not only affects your physical health but your mental health, and even that's interconnected. As we know, and as more information comes out, like the more if we prioritize our physical well-being, that's going to feed into our mental well-being, and vice versa. Like, it's all about putting ourselves first sometimes, and not always putting someone else first. But you've mentioned quite a few times about alcohol and how
Hmm.
you've been sober for 12 months, and it's obviously something that a lot of men struggle with, whether they know it or not. Myself, I last time I had an alcoholic drink was March last year. Now, up until that point, I didn't drink a lot. I went through a period where I had actually got diagnosed with cluster headaches, and that kind of set me. I don't know that alcohol was the trigger for it, but I kind of process of elimination. I thought that's what it was. Cluster headaches are like, basically, if you get 10 out of 10 pain happens the same time every night. If you imagine someone's trying to take your eyeball out from the inside of your skull with an ice pick, like that's what it felt like twice a night for about a week, and then it stopped. Touch wood, I haven't had a second bout of them, but that kind of watered me off alcohol. Tried coming back to it, and I kind of just gone, you know what, this isn't serving me. I'm getting off it. You've kind of gone through a journey where you've mentioned that you used it as a crutch, which I know like a lot of men do. They think that it's not a problem for them, but if we really drill down to it, it probably is. Do you want to talk about like your process to get to the point where you've gone, righto, enough's enough. I need to just cut this out completely? Because I think as men, some of us go, oh, I'll just limit it. I just won't do
Hmm.
it as much. And while some people can do that, there's a lot of people that I've come across that they probably actually need to just get rid of it completely.
Yeah, this is a great question because alcohol, and particularly in Australia, is embedded in our culture. Like, it's probably more socially acceptable to drink than it is not to drink from a cultural perspective. If you don't drink, and was me for many years, if I came across someone who didn't drink, I'd be like, why? What's wrong with you? You know? And so for me, alcohol, it started, in my teens. It was the end of footy season, end of season footy trip that we went around, and this is my first experience of drinking alcohol. And at first, it was just all fun, like many people, like many teenagers, when we start drinking, it's a lot of fun. You're hanging out with friends, you're connecting, you're getting up to some some mischief, excuse me, and it's just fun. But for me, with OCD, and I didn't realize this until more recently, it was a way for me to slow my brain down and to feel normal and to numb everything. And so alcohol would give me the night off, basically, of thinking. And OCD is largely a thinking condition, and so I loved that, but I didn't realize I loved that until more recently. And so for years and years and years, I would drink to get drunk. It wouldn't be a good night unless I was drunk, and that could look like just me being on the couch watching footy with a 6 to 12 beers, or it could be me out at a party or going out to the pub or going to a nightclub or whatever it was growing up. It would, if there was something social, it would need to be drinking always, and I'd always be worried like of running out of beer. What would happen if you ran out of beer? Because that was like my escape. So for so long I did this, so long, and I talked about when 2012 and the lead up to that. So for the 2 years in leading up to that, we'd moved from Canberra to Hobart, and I felt very lonely. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt very lonely. I struggled to connect in with local people. I had the same in Canberra as well, so I drank a lot in Canberra. And so I turned to alcohol to numb everything. But then what started to happen was I'd go to Friday night drinks after work, for example, and I'd get drunk. I'd be the life of the party, and everyone loved it. And I loved it as well. But then what would happen the next day is my brain would go, okay, Simon, you've had the night off of OCD. It's time to ramp it up. So this was my hangover. I never got hangovers like most people would experience them. I got it as rumination. And so I start ruminating about the night before, trying to piece the night before together. And the reason I do this was because OCD for me is around trying to avoid harm or discomfort to somebody else. So I do behaviors and I think in certain ways because I want to avoid conflict around harm. And so I'd piece the night together, trying to identify if I had caused harm to somebody else. And that harm being maybe I said something I shouldn't have said and it's going to cause trouble. And then also, I wanted to avoid trouble myself. So I'm like, okay, did I say something or did I do something that offended someone? Because on Monday morning, I don't want to be in the manager's office getting in trouble, potentially lose my job. Again, financial trauma, lose my job, lose finances, and so forth. And so I'd ruminate to the point where reality would become distorted. The night before, the Friday night drinks, I could no longer remember for what actually happened. My brain would be trying to trick me. So I might turn the drink again, trying to numb that again, numb that pain. And this would last for days and days. And then I go back to work and I realize I'm not getting in trouble. Nothing happened. But I'd do this on loop every weekend or every other weekend. This was becoming an issue. And this continued to be an issue. I never dealt with it. I thought my drinking wasn't too bad. I didn't see the issue that my wife saw. In fact, I told her that if she's got an issue, maybe she should go and speak to someone. I thought maybe I'd cut it back. I'd go for a few runs around the block and I'd only drink on certain nights and I'd only have two or three, but two or three for me is not possible, I discovered. So I started making all these rules around alcohol. But where it turned around is studying social work. So I came to social work as a mature age student in my mid-30s. So where I was able to look at life and community and how culture impacts our identity. And I discovered that alcohol is a depressant. People had been saying this to me for years, but I never believed it until I read about it through my studies. So I'm like, okay, this makes sense. Don't drink if if you're prone to depression. But I still did it. I ignored the research and all that type of stuff. And so, but I started planting a seed. It started planting a seed in me, going, okay, something's brewing here. But what really turned it was my kids, right? And so, a couple of years ago, around the COVID times, after COVID, we start going out to the world again. And I remember it might be like a Friday night, and my son Gus would come to me and say, "Dad, it's the footy. Are you drinking tonight? Are you having a beer?" And there was nothing untoward around it. It was just like he'd seen Dad do this with the footy, so he started associating Dad with football and drinking a beer. And I said, "Yeah, I would do that." But then at the same time, something inside of me really just didn't sit well, that conversation, and I hated that conversation. But I still drank to numb everything and to disassociate. And then a couple, that continued, and then we start going out to restaurants for dinner. And again, it's a social thing. So I'm the designated drinker. I would say that to my wife, and she's the designated driver, which is it was fine because she never drank anyway, so it kind of made sense. But I made a point of saying that. And it's interesting whenever I get in the passenger seat of the car, the kids go, "Daddy, why aren't you driving? Like, this is weird. You've got your spot in the car, and it's definitely not in the
It's
passenger seat." And by now, my daughter was asking this question as well. And so then we'd have to have a discussion with, a 6 year old and a 3 year old at the time, saying, "Oh, well, Daddy's been drinking, and it's responsible not to drink and drive, and all this type of stuff." And I'm sitting in there, my heart's sinking in this conversation, going, "This is a shit conversation to have with a 6 year old and a 3 year old. What am I doing with my life?" You know. So this was happening a couple of times as well, starting to plant more seeds. And then I got to my 40th, which was last year, and I thought, okay, yeah, we'll have a party, we'll get drunk, we'll have a great night, maybe I'll get some nice gifts. And I got lots of gifts, but they were all craft beer. And old version of me would have loved that. Like, yes, we're not going to run out of beer tonight. This is going to be a great night. 40-year-old version of me, who had had all these little planted seeds over the last couple of years, it just didn't sit well. So I drank and I got drunk, and then it got to the end of the night and I broke down to Rachel and I started crying, and she's like, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Oh, it's my 40th. I thought I'd get some nice presents." She said, "Simon, the reason you got beer is because that's the identity that people associate you with. Simon likes to drink. We're going to get him beer on his birthday." That was it. That was the last thing that I needed to, along that timeline, to say, I don't want that identity. I want to be healthy. I don't want to drink anymore. I don't want my OCD to have the night off. I want to deal with my OCD through therapy. I don't need alcohol. I don't want alcohol. And to be fair, the few months leading into it, I was drinking and I was just feeling yuck all the time. Like, I never throw up, but I just felt sluggish and lethargic. And even the taste was starting to go as well, like the taste that I'd liked for so long. And alcohol was becoming more expensive. I went from normal beer, which was, $50 a carton, to craft beer, which was like $60, $70 for a 16 pack. So I'm getting less beer, and that's in my head as well. I'm like, oh, I could have saved money by doing this or buying that, and I could have drank more if I bought the cheaper stuff. I started having this financial discussion in my head, like that. Enough was enough. And so the next day after, we took all the beer out, tipped it down the sink, or gave it away, or whatever it was, and haven't looked back. And there's been a few people that have helped me along that journey. Certainly the kids. I like to say Rachel did, but for some reason I always ignored Rachel. I think this is I don't know if it's a guy culture thing not to listen to your spouse sometimes, and but I did that, and I don't love that about me. But there was other guys that actually prompted me to do this, and I mentioned Simon before, the counsellor from Adelaide. So he was an alcoholic, and I had him on the Buy podcast as well to share his story, and he said something along the lines of, the moment he stopped placing value in alcohol was the moment that he realized that he could give up. And that sat with me as well. And I'm like, that's really profound. I like that. And I think by the time I turned 40, I had stopped placing the value in the alcohol, and I was actually placing more value on being a healthier version of me, a more present dad, a more present partner as well, and someone who didn't want to hide away from the emotions anymore, wanted to actually feel them and deal with them in real time without having to divert for a few hours and then deal with it. Because I wasn't dealing with it, I was just diverting. I was kicking that can down the road, and then I'd kick it down the road again, and so forth. And so a few people helped me along that journey, and the recognition that I don't need to drink and I don't need to get drunk. And then I guess it's been almost 12 months now, and the next mind bubble that I've had to overcome is, what do I replace it with? Or do I need to replace it with? And I do like drinking. I like the taste of beer, and so non-alcoholic beer was my next hurdle. I'm like, there was two thoughts. One, everyone says that non-alcoholic beer tastes like rubbish, and some of it does. I didn't realize that some of it actually tastes pretty good, and it tastes like the real thing, right? But I don't get hangovers. I don't get drunk. I can still drive. I'm happy to say now that I drink a non-alcoholic beer. The second one was because it's got beer in the name of the drink. I felt like I was cheating. If
Hmm.
I'm saying I'm sober, but I'm drinking a non-alcoholic beer. I had a few discussions with a few people that drink non-alcoholic beers, and they're like, Simon, it's just a drink.
Hmm.
Ginger beer, Bundaberg ginger beer. I love Bundaberg ginger beer. It's got the name beer in it. It's not beer. It's you can buy non-alcoholic beer from Woolies and Coles. I mean, in Queensland here, you can't buy grog at the supermarket like other states can. And so I'm figured, well, if I can get it off the shelf and it's got 0.0 on it, then that's enough to tell me that I'm not cheating on myself, that I am actually still sober. Because I take a lot of pride in that now, saying that
Hmm.
I'm sober, and after so many years of drinking, and more recently, like my stress levels have been huge with this financial stuff we are talking about earlier, and I've said to Rachel, I said, "Fuck, I want to get a beer, and I just want to drown these sorrows that I'm in. I'm done." But at the same, then I quickly catch that in my brain and say, "You know what? No, that's an intrusive thought. That's a negative thought. I'm not going to do that because look how far I've come." And Rachel says she loves me now that I don't drink. Like I don't snore anywhere near as
That's
much. I probably snore a little bit, but not as anywhere near as much. Um, you know, I'm losing weight. I had this for many years, for 20 years, I had this rash on my chest, right? And I'd be ashamed to take my top off when I go swimming. That rash has disappeared. So I think it was like something that was in the beer that was
yeah.
creating the rash and stuff like that. So there's been so many positives that have come out, and the kids have stopped talking about. If I'm in the passenger seat, they're not talking about beer. It might be something else. Like I just hate driving my wife's car, you know. But it's not talking about beer, and so that's a great positive as well. So yeah, those few things have happened along the timeline that have really encouraged me to give up the grog.
That's such a good story because you're right. It's so ingrained into our culture as Australians that and I look back on my time drinking like retrospectively, and like you, whenever I drank, like it was on. Like we weren't drinking to for to quote an Australian you know phrase, we weren't there to fuck spiders. Like we were on to you were doing it, and but like I look back on it, and whenever I got drunk, like I was a complete dick. Like I was just not a good person to be around. And you mentioned like taking the value out of the alcohol. I think for me it was almost the inverse of that, where I valued the time that I was losing when I would drink more than like what the alcohol gave me. That was for me the big eye opener. Was I would get hangovers, especially and we had just started the business, and I would not be normal, like cognitively normal, till like Wednesday if I drank on a Saturday. And it's like, so I valued that time, that Monday through Wednesday, and that productive time more. Our daughter was very young when I kind of made that decision that I was really going to limit it. But yeah, it's really, I think, about finding something that you value more. And the non-alcoholic beer, I've had my brother's wedding in the time that I haven't drank as well too. And I think one of the things with that, especially for somebody who has that story where they can't just have one beer, I think the non-alcoholic beer, like it's quite easy just to have one or two with dinner and that's it. Like you don't feel like you need to keep feeding yourself after that. And you're 100% right. Like looking at it, it's just a drink. Would be the same as if you were having a lemonade or a water with dinner, right? Like it's just a drink.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got a family wedding on the horizon. It hasn't been booked yet, but like at all the family weddings I've been at, I'm being the guy with the chair in the middle of the dance floor trying to pretend he's on Dirty Dancing. I've been that drunk, and I've been thinking, oh, how do I go to this new wedding? Like that hasn't been booked yet. No pressure, Ash, if you're listening.
That's
But they're engaged, and him and his partner Rachel as well. And I'm just like, and I've been thinking about it. But at the same time, I'm like, no, I'm okay going to this thing, and I'm hoping that they have a non-alcoholic beer there because I'd love to have a non-alcoholic beer. And if they don't, like that's fine. I'll have water or soda water or lemonade or whatever it is. Maybe I'll be the designated driver that night. I'm going to flip that and let Rach put her hair down and with her family because this is her brother, and I'll take pride in being that designated driver. Whereas historically, I was like, no way, I'm on the back seat, half, my ass hanging out the window and all sorts of, rubbish as well. So I think it's about also looking at it as we can change the culture around it as well. And so I
Yeah.
found other guys who like non-alcoholic beers, and we talk about them, and we've even talked about having podcast episodes where we sit around with non-alcoholic beers like we would at the pub, and we can go deep and meaningful and talk about what we like about these non-alcoholics as well. And we can create a new culture around that. I think that's where we need to go with that type of stuff.
And I think especially for big occasions too, you mentioned wedding coming up and spoke about my brother's wedding. Like one thing I look back on that now and not drinking while I was there, right? Um, and it started off, it was just a small immediate family wedding, right? And we were able to drink over that time, didn't drink at all. It allowed me to appreciate the little things that happened over the course of the day a lot more because I was less concerned with like where the next beer was coming from. Like there was a few different moments where we were all in a bus, we were going back to where they had the reception for their friends, and my son and daughter were sitting in the back with my brother Steve and his now wife Emily, and they were playing with each other, and we weren't getting involved. I was just sitting there watching, and the giggling and the laughter and just like that's a very clear and vivid memory I have of that, and just such an amazing memory that I'll be able to keep with me, that if I was drinking, that's probably not going to be there. And that's where comes back to what I said, where it was for me, it was there was more value on the time I was losing than on the feeling that the alcohol was giving me. And that's yeah, so that's it's thank you so much for sharing that story, because it's just something that, I mean, I'm pretty passionate about. I know you are as well too. And look, some people can have one or two beers and be perfectly okay, and if that's you, all power to you. But there are a lot of people around, I think, who maybe need to get a little bit more real about what their relationship with alcohol is, because it's one that a lot, myself included, we think we're okay with it, but if we really dive down to it, we're probably not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think getting real is it goes beyond just the alcohol, but it's like our mental health. How are we going in business? How are we going with our relationships? Like I think we need to switch off what I call mindfulness, is switching off autopilot of life, where we think everything's fine, we gloss over everything. We just go from one thing to next thing without really consciously thinking about it. But if we can switch off the autopilot and switch on conscious living and get real with ourselves, like how are we actually traveling? Like we talk about "Are you okay?" day, and this often comes up in the men's mental health discussion. Is like why isn't every day "Are you okay?" day,
Mm,
and go beyond the "Are you okay?" question to how you're really going, and let's go there and get real with it. And that's a tough topic, and that's where I guess people balk at these kind of conversations. But what we've just shown for this last little while is we can have an open, honest chat about mental health and all the things that are interwoven between finance, trauma, COVID. We can talk about business, family pressures, drinking. It's all intertwined, and we're probably better for it as well.
absolutely. Well, to wrap this up, seeing as it is a podcast about being a dad, one last question for you. And we'll end this on a positive note. And I know it's very hard to nail down one, but what's the best part about being a dad?
Oh, when you said your children laughing, I just think of my daughter Pippa, and she has got the most amazing laugh, and that laugh reminds me of how precious childhood is, and how our kids look at the world in a very different light to what we do. And so every time I hear Pippa's laugh, and she was doing it last night at the table, I was just internally, I just light up, and it's just amazing. And then for my son, it's not just about Pippa. My son, like I've been coaching his soccer team this year, and really enjoying him growing as a young boy on that soccer field, and seeing things like when he might knock over another player and stopping and helping that other player up and stuff like that. I just have a lot of pride in some of the things that we're hopefully teaching him, or that he's learning from somewhere, and just seeing him grow into this little cool little dude that he is. So it's just moments like these where I'm just reminded that I must be doing a good enough job as a dad.
It's about giving yourself that praise sometimes, like you said earlier, and just
Yeah.
allowing yourself that time to appreciate the stuff that's going on and all the good stuff we have in our life. But Simon, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us. Do you want to let everybody know where they can find you, how to access their services if you're interested, and where the best place to go is?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a website. So it's mindfulmen.com.au. That's got my therapy stuff on there. It's got my socials. It's got the Mindful Men podcast, which you've been a guest on as well. So go check out that episode. And yeah, you can give me a call, send me an email, and we can take the discussion further.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for listening, everybody. Hopefully, we can get Simon back on the podcast again one day and we can expand a little bit further on the conversation that we've had. But thanks again for joining us, Simon. Thanks, everyone else, for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.